Okay, hello. This is Clayton Witt here with the doing the second discussion board for American Revolution, and for this week we were tasked with picking a woman from the Revolutionary era and doing some research on her, and particularly looking at the distinctions or the kind of cross currents between myth and reality, as a lot of these women that were actually in the list that we could choose from were actually had mythological accounts to them, and kind of sifting through the tradition versus the actual history. And so the woman that I chose was Molly Pitcher, and kind of going about a little bit of her story. The traditional account is that Molly Pitcher was a woman that followed her husband into battle, and particularly at the Battle of Monmouth, where her husband ended up collapsing from heat stroke, and she ended up picking up his artillery ramrod and loading the cannon that he was stationed at, by assisting him in that when he was passed out. And that's kind of, there's different variations of that story. There are many that would suggest that she got her name, also the pitcher part of her name, because she carried water to many of the artillerymen that were on the line at the battle, and that's kind of where she acquired that nickname. But the question remains is who actually is Molly Pitcher, and that is kind of what I want to kind of sift through here and do a little bit discussion. First off is an account from the period, from a memoir by a guy by the name of Joseph Plum Martin, who has one of the accounts that he has given at the Battle of Monmouth. And he says, quote, "A woman whose husband belonged to the artillery and who was then attached to a piece in the engagement attended with her husband in the piece the whole time. While in the act of reaching a cartridge and having one of her feet as far before the other as she could step, a cannon shot from the enemy passed directly between her legs without doing any other damage than carrying away all the lower part of her petticoat." And so that was his account of this woman that was seen at the battle. The problem with Martin's account at first is the fact that there was really no record of this woman ever being there, and the difficulty in actually tracing through who this person was and exactly whether or not this action actually took place. Now, it is confirmed that there was a woman, per se, who did do certain duties like this. But the problem emerges in the fact that, and this, the traditional story is that the name Molly Pitcher has been assigned to a woman by the name of Mary Ludwig Hayes, and this is the Molly Pitcher of the story. The problem with that distinction, because it seems pretty self-explanatory there, the problem with that is that there are many other women throughout the Revolutionary War era that have done similar actions. So Mary Ludwig Hayes is not just the only one. And so the question begins is, where exactly does the Molly Pitcher story begin? Who is the original Molly Pitcher from which this story derives from? And to kind of tap into that a little bit more and discuss a little bit more about that, I actually have some information brought from one of our own textbooks, which is A Respectable Army, the Military Origins of the Republic, which goes in a little bit more about women in the battlefield in that camp. And this says, quote, "Washington and his closest advisors also accepted the presence of women in the army. So-called camp followers were to be found traveling with almost all 18th century armies. Usually marginally poor, these women came along with husbands or lovers, or because they could not find other ways to survive economically." Moving on a little bit down, it discusses some of what they were required to do. It says, "In return for half rations, armies assigned these women a variety of duties, including cooking, caring for the sick and wounded, washing and mending clothes, scavenging the field for clothes and equipment, and burying the dead after battle." So given this information, it seems that there is a large portion of women that actually followed the army, Continental Army, and to be with their husbands or to be with their significant others or whatever. And were also tasked with doing duties for the army. So this means that there was a lot of women that were actually doing a lot of what the Molly Pitcher, Mary Ludwig Hayes, was doing. So she essentially was not a outlier in that sense. And so it's, again, difficult to kind of discuss where the story comes from. Finally, we have another piece here by historian, let me see if I can find it, by historian Emily Teep, or Type, or however you say her last name, it's a bit interesting, who talks a little bit more about the story of Molly Pitcher. And her definitive answer is this. She says, she asked the question, who is the real Molly Pitcher? And her answer is, the answer is quite simple, all of them and none of them. Molly Pitcher is a legendary personality constructed from the tales of bravery and daring of revolutionary women. The name Molly Pitcher is a collective generic term inasmuch as G.I. Joe was a moniker for a soldier or soldiers in World War II. The name Molly Pitcher, like the term G.I. Joe, is a common label for the countless nameless women and men who are anonymously honored for their heroic service. So, for example, like the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier is used as a way to reference soldiers that had died on the field of battle but are missing or unknown or cannot be identified, things like that. And that's her analysis, Emily Teep's analysis, that the legend itself or the story itself, we can't definitively bring it to one person or not. And so the fact that there are many women out there doing the same thing, well, they all contribute to the Molly Pitcher story. And so the name Molly Pitcher, or the moniker Molly Pitcher, is used to describe all of these women, essentially. They are all under that same category, which is a pretty interesting conclusion there. So we know that Molly Pitcher existed because there were a multitude of women that did similar duties to what Molly Pitcher in the legend or in the story did. So that was my conclusion. That's my finding in some of my information that I give to you. Thank you guys for watching.